Hello and welcome to the MovieKing Podcast. My name is David Jurmann and I'll be your host. To start off today's show, I'm going to review Venom, The Last Dance, and in the second half, I'll be reviewing the film Conclave. So, beginning with Venom, The Last Dance, this is a movie I have so much to say about and also very little at the same time. So let's get started with just the basic thing of I am a fan of Venom as a character. I always have been, always will be. He's one of my favorite Spider-Man villains. He's just so cool with his design. Like, I love the symbiotic sort of, like, gloss he has, and also just the teeth, which are terrifying. I just remember being, like, terrified of him on the 3D Spider-Man ride at Universal in Orlando. And also just grew up really liking him in Sam Raimi's Spider-Man 3. Even though not a great movie, Venom is still pretty cool in it. And we just had the Spider-Man 2 video game for the PS5. Venom's a cool character in that. Just a lot of awesome stuff with Venom in it over the years. And initially when they announced these Venom movies, I was a bit turned off by the idea of having just a set of Venom movies without Spider-Man in them. At least initially that's how I thought it was going to go. But as it's continued, it's become more and more clear we're just not going to see them interact because that's just Sony's stupid agenda. But even then, I was just also a bit turned off by the whole thing of making this a PG-13 buddy comedy. Like, I always saw Venom as a more hardcore, rated R, maybe a little bit spooky, a little bit, gruesome, kind of like really showing off what I think Venom can be. And I don't mind having some humor in these movies because Venom can be a very, silly character in the comics, but, just kind of what I wanted out of, like, a solo Venom movie. If you're not going to have Spider-Man in it, I'd like you to at least to make it a little bit more, edgy than, like, what we've just been getting in these standard comic book movies. But in any case, I got over that eventually and learned to just judge these movies based on what they are, not what I wish it was. And with that being said, I do not care for these movies. I think Venom 1 is a bad movie. It's a movie that I think I'm laughing at more than I'm laughing with. And it's so hard to take seriously in any way. Even when a comedy does come along, it's not really, like, that funny for the reasons it thinks it is, in my opinion. I think it's just, like, a very dumb movie. It has tons of plot holes. One in particular that has bothered me for years, which I guess I'll say here because, it's Venom 1's been out since 2018. So if you don't want any spoilers, skip like 30 seconds for Venom 1. This isn't even touching this new Venom movie. But just talking about Venom 1, something that's always bothered me is, like, this whole thing with, like, one of the doctors says that that Venom is, like, killing Eddie. And, Venom's like, no, I'm not. And then by the end of the movie, it's just never addressed if he was or isn't. I mean, like, we trust Venom by the end, but it's also, like, I'm sure the doctor wasn't lying and saying, like, that he's, eating it. Maybe he was. I don't know. It's just the movie never addresses it again, and, like, it's a whole big thing, so I don't know why they didn't touch on it again. But anyway, I think Venom 1, regardless of that even, it's just not a good movie. Venom 2 is Venom Let There Be Carnage, and I had a lot of hope for that movie. I mean, I just love Carnage as a villain. Woody Harrelson was playing him, which is a really cool choice. You had Andy Serkis coming to direct. There were just so many things that could have been good about it. And honestly, even though I was disappointed in the first Venom, I had a lot of excitement for the second one, and it wasn't much better than the first, in my opinion. And I think that's partly due to the script again. It's just like, it doesn't really take itself that seriously. You have this kind of weird subplot with, like, Eddie and Venom getting split up for, like, the whole movie, and it just doesn't really work. By the third act, it kind of gets exciting, and that's the best part of the movie easily. It's at least a nice looking movie, but I just didn't care for it. And now Venom 3 comes along, Venom The Last Dance, and it has the writer of all three movies, Kelly Marcel. She comes to direct this one, and, I thought the trailers looked good. I was pretty excited once again. This is, like, the third time I was kind of at least, like, interested in this movie and really hoping it got better. But I'm sad to say, once again, that I just feel like this franchise lacks what it even not even what I wanted it to be, but what it needs to be, and that is really just a good movie, a well-written movie that has good stakes, a lot of heart, Even, like, looking at it just as a buddy comedy, it just feels like a movie that doesn't know where it's going and has no stakes. It just feels like it's pandering more to younger audiences, and I just find that very frustrating. But I do think there's one consistent factor in all three movies that is awesome, and that is Tom Hardy. He is still the clear highlight of these movies, playing Eddie and Venom together, and he has great chemistry with himself in playing these roles. He's just an awesome actor, and he's giving it his all. I mean, even if the script isn't great, he's really always trying to do the best he can, and I commend him for it. He is, if anything good was to come out of these movies, it is Tom Hardy. But getting back to the director, this is directed by Kelly Marcel, who wrote the other movies, and she does a nice job directing this one, actually. This is like her debut, and it has some of the most impressive action sequences of these three movies, and the movie does a nice job balancing the tone and giving the most complete version of this Eddie Venom relationship. The movie just does a really good job of kind of showing them together. They have, once again, really good chemistry, and you just feel a lot for when they're together. Like, there's just something enjoyable about it. But I don't think Kelly Marcel does herself any favors with the script she wrote. It makes basically no sense. I'm not really going to get into any spoilery detail. I'm just going to mention a plot element that if you haven't seen the movie, you won't even know what I'm talking about. But here we go. So there's this thing in the movie called a codex, which is such a confusing and poorly executed plot point. The rules of it make absolutely no sense when you really think about it. I mean, within the movie, like when you're just watching it, there's times where you're like, okay, but even then thinking about it, I'm like, that doesn't make any sense at all. Like, why does it work this way and not this way? The movie just also has characters making decisions that constantly go against its own rules, and it gets very frustrating after a while. Like, there's literally a whole thing set, like, we can't do this or this will happen. And then later on, a character just says, well, I want to do it anyway. And I'm like, why? Like, that's so stupid. Anyway, though, that's kind of that. I also just think the story is so dull. It follows up after the pretty exciting post-credit scenes from both Let There Be Carnage and Spider-Man No Way Home, only to do practically nothing with it, and then go on a dumb goose chase between Eddie and the government, which really just isn't interesting at all to me. I think like they could have done so many more interesting things. The movie even starts off setting something up, which I'll get to, but it chooses to do Eddie and the government, and I don't know why. Let's see, the side characters here are truly awful. Dr. Teddy Payne is such an uninteresting character and gets, like, no development. It gives her, like, this one weird flashback scene, which sort of is important, but also not really. It's so dumb. I really didn't like her character at all. Rex Strickland is the main villain, who, besides having a good performance from Chiwetel Ejiofor, he has nothing notable about him. He's really just angry military guy, and you really don't get to know anything about him, and he's just a really bland character along with Teddy Payne. And then we have Null, who's the kind of the big villain set up at the beginning of the movie, and he could have been such a cool threat. And he's also played by Andy Serkis, who I mentioned directed the second film. And Andy Serkis is one of the best motion capture actors ever. I mean, he's played characters like Caesar the Ape in Planet of the Apes. He's played Gollum. He's played King Kong. He's done so much great stuff, and he's a great actor. And he's good as Null, but he contributes nothing to the story. This character contributes nothing to the story, which again is fully on the script. And lastly, you have this hippie family led by this guy Martin Moon. Again, I couldn't tell you anything about him or his family. I only know his name because I looked up on the Wikipedia page because I couldn't remember his name. Really forgettable character. I mean, I don't know why we spent so much time with him and his family. It's like Justice League, where you're spending time with like this Russian family. Just bizarre choices that really don't impact the story or characters and don't really have anything interesting going on. So that was a problem I had. The movie keeps meandering the whole time. Like, it spends 5 minutes watching Eddie and Venom on a plane, and another 15 minutes at some point with them in a van, and another 10 minutes at a casino, and, they spend some time dancing, but none of it's interesting. Like, you can say it's superficially entertaining. Like, watching it, you're like, oh, this is a fun scene, but I didn't even find that it was really keeping me engaged. Like, I was just pretty bored watching it. I thought it was not contributing anything to the plot, which is a really frustrating thing as a movie. I'll give it that I'm looking at this movie much more critically, I'm sure, than the average audiences, but I think you at least need to do something to advance the story. If you've seen the trailers, you saw that, Mrs. Chen just kind of shows up at a point and has a little thing, but there's nothing relevant about her in the movie. Like, you could just go to the bathroom, come back, and you wouldn't have missed anything, because the movie just chooses to spend time just doing things for fun rather than doing things that actually matter. It actually reminds me a little bit of Despicable Me 4 from earlier this summer, which was also a movie that kind of just spent a lot of its time doing skits and sketches that don't really contribute anything to the story, and it would just do it because it thought it was funny. But by the end of the movie, you're just kind of like, none of this was really important to what was going on. So it's a bit disappointing, especially for a big movie like this. But I will say, when things do get going and get a lot more interesting in the third act, it's the fun and crazy stuff I wanted from these movies. And there's something in the last 20 minutes that I just really enjoyed. It was just a lot of fun, entertaining, some cool action. There's some fun stuff for fans of the comics and impressive visual effects. It's a nice finale, I have to say. Considering I really wasn't interested in 2/3 of the movie, the last third actually got me pretty engaged. And I had a good time with that. So that was actually by far the saving grace of the movie, besides Tom Hardy as, Eddie and Venom. But somewhat unfortunately, I think the emotional beats in the third act also fall pretty flat. The movie is set up to be a finale, a la The Last Dance in the title, and it's just a finale with no sense of finality. It just doesn't have any feeling to me where it was like, ooh, this really is the end. You watch Lord of the Rings, Return of the King, or Return of the Jedi, and you feel like these are finales. You feel like these are the ending of a trilogy. Things are, coming to a head. And this movie doesn't really do that, partly because it spends so much time in the first 2/3 not really doing anything, so there's no build-up. But the ending just kind of falls on its face when it tries to get emotional, because it just didn't land. And part of this also may be a directorial issue, but the actors didn't seem to have the right reactions to what was happening, considering things that should have felt more important and emotional, and it just didn't have that gravitas that it needed. And I just really think the final couple of minutes in the movie are so cheesy and lost me. It just, you had this one bit in the third act that I was like, okay, I could see what you're trying to go for here. But then the last couple minutes just really felt off-putting and wasn't hitting me the way I think they wanted it to at all. So that really lost me there. And yes, the movie does have 2 post-credit scenes, both of which kind of follow up on things that may be happening in the future. The first one just really feels like kind of a promise or a tease that we'll probably never see the end of. And the second one is very vague, but if you're paying attention, I think you'll see what it's trying to get at. And it's not exactly a surprise, but we'll see if it actually goes anywhere like the first one. So that could be interesting, but we shall see. But in case you couldn't tell, I really am not a fan of this movie. It's actually the worst in the trilogy, in my opinion, and I should note, again, it's a trilogy that I'm already not a fan of. If you like these movies and you've enjoyed the first 2, you'll probably have a good time with this one. I totally get that, and I'm glad people enjoy these movies. I'm glad they serve to, especially a younger audience. I remember, especially when I saw Venom, Let There Be Carnage, there were a bunch of kids in the audience, and I was like, oh, cool, kids are really enjoying this. It's not the movie I wanted. I wanted that really hard R, but people like this stuff, and I'm glad people enjoy it, but it's just not for me at all. I think they're really poorly made films. And I'll always be interested to see what they do with these characters, because Tom Hardy as Eddie and Venom is just such a cool casting choice that I really need them to do it justice at some point. I really need him to meet up with like a Spider-Man at some point, so I'm keeping my fingers crossed on that. But this is really a movie where really just Tom Hardy and the final 20 minutes keep it afloat. Otherwise, this movie would honestly be even worse than it is to me, and I just wasn't a fan of it. I'm actually trying to think, though, like, I'm not sure which movie is more frustrating to me, this or Joker 2, because, I mean, I'm sure a lot of people say, like, oh, Joker 2 is easily worse, and I wouldn't blame you there. It's really just like, to me, I view Joker 2 as a movie that is actively mad at its audience and actively insulting it. And this is a movie, Venom 3, that is actively doing nothing interesting. And, I mean, both movies essentially have nothing going on in them, but I will say Venom is at least a little more entertaining at points, but Joker is probably a little more well-made and at least has something to talk about. So, I don't know, I just really think both of these were lackluster comic book movies. It should have been, honestly, both of them should have been really cool, but both were very disappointing. And, again, if you like this movie, that's awesome. I commend that. Just wasn't for me at all. Even my audience didn't seem into it, so I don't know, though, who really enjoyed it. But that's just what makes horse races, I guess. I'm going to give this one a C-. I didn't like it. Really didn't do anything for me. With these movies, though, you never know. Maybe there'll be another one down the line. And if there is, I'll be there to watch it, and I'll be rooting for it. So we'll see what happens. Alright, and following up Venom the Last Dance, we have Conclave. This is a film about electing a new pope after one unexpectedly dies. And it's about someone who is tasked with managing it and finding shocking revelations in the process. I didn't really have any expectations going into this film. Maybe I should have, because of good reviews, and the director, Edward Berger, just did All Quiet on the Western Front, which was nominated for several Academy Awards. Was a pretty good movie, but the trailers for this one, Conclave, didn't wow me, and I can't say this is usually my type of movie. I also just wasn't a fan of All Quiet on the Western Front like a lot of people were, but I did like it. It was a good movie. And with that being said, I feel pretty similarly about Conclave. It is well made. Like, don't get me wrong, this is a well made film that actually has a lot of good stuff going for it, and it's held together especially by good writing, performances, production design, and a memorable score. But I'll just kind of start off with one of my issues, which is that I can't say the story was nearly as shocking as it wanted me to think it was. There's a lot of things in this movie that really want to push this idea that, like, something really crazy is going on, and, it's really going to shake the ground, but it's not that to me. I don't think there was anything in this movie that was really all that surprising, but I will say it is interesting to see what happens. And something I did enjoy about the movie is I really like the themes about what makes a good pope and what makes someone deserving of the role. I just really appreciated the ideas about belief and faith, which I found pretty interesting. The script in general is well done and communicates these themes very well. I just really liked what it has to say. And there's one scene in particular that's really strong where the lead character gives this big speech on what does a good pope do and why, what makes one worth choosing. And I think he really, hit the nail on the head there. It was really a good scene to me, and I was pretty moved by it. As for the performances, they're all really good here. I always love Ralph Fiennes. Stanley Tucci and Sergio Castellitto are also other standouts. Everyone here in the movie, though, in general, does a good job, and I want to give everyone credit for that. They really carry this movie. And I also want to give a shout out to the production design, which is very impressive. This movie probably will get an Academy Award nomination for it, because I read online they actually tried to film in the Sistine Chapel, but they weren't able to, so they literally built a replica of the Sistine Chapel to film in, and it looks very believable. I mean, the whole time I was pretty convinced they were shooting in it, so really, they did a great job there. Detail is great. I would be shocked if this isn't nominated for production design at the very least. And as I said, the score is very distinct. It's by Volker Bertelmann. I hope I'm not butchering your name, but he did All Quiet on the Western Front, which won Best Score at the Oscars actually a couple of years ago. And that is a score that I wish Babylon won Best Score. I still won't get over that, but I will say the score to All Quiet on the Western Front is so distinct and memorable. It just has like these three notes like boom, boom, boom. It's just three notes, but it really sticks with you and is a very memorable motif. And really, in general, Volker makes scores that are very simple but stay with you, as I said. And this one has a very similar type of score that is also very powerful and simple, but it really sticks with you. So kind of that's where I like the movie technically. I think on a technical level, it's very good. Really, just my main issues largely come with the fact that the story isn't all that compelling to me. I'm sure there will be people out there who think it's very riveting. I do like that the movie kind of treats this voting thing, like a voting ceremony, sort of like it's a real political thriller, and that is very interesting, but I just don't think at the end of the day, it's really still just a voting ceremony, and I wasn't too enthralled or shocked by what was happening. So I was like mildly interested. I was, curious to see where it would go, but I wasn't ever like on the edge of my seat thinking like, oh my god, I need to know what happens. So that was a bit disappointing to me. That's probably where the movie kind of lost me a bit, but maybe others will find that really interesting. I would also say the movie might be too long. It gets a bit repetitive at points due to the nature of what it is. Really, a lot of the movie is just watching people kind of vote and then talk and then vote again. I think changing things up would have helped convey the feeling of a thriller more, especially to keep the pace a little bit faster and keep things a bit more rapid fire. So that would have probably helped a bit. But even after all that, I want to note that the ending is a surprise, but a welcome one. This is something I liked, but people will definitely be mixed on it, depending on where you stand politically. My theater, some people in my theater was really like compelled by it. Others were laughing at it. You could tell it was definitely going to hit differently with people, but I liked it thinking about it. And I think politics aside, it was actually a really good way to end the story. It ties the whole thing together and kind of encapsulates the entire point of the movie. And that's really like, I believe that fully, even without politics mixing into it. I think it really actually does just do a good job of keeping what this story had to say and really like conveying that at its greatest point. So I like that. And even though I wasn't huge on this movie, I still enjoyed it. It's definitely a well-made film. I'm just not quite sure if I'm as in love with it as others are. But it did work for me. I think it's pretty well made, and I'd still suggest people go see it. I think it has stuff to like. Personally, I don't think I'd put it even close with my favorite movies of the year. I don't even think it's up there at all, but I would give it a thumbs up. I liked it. But I also want to note before I give my final rating that my audience may impact my view on the film a little bit. I always like to say that. I had a pretty bad audience experience. I try to zone that out. I try to tune it out whenever I can and really just like focus on the movie. But I mean, I'd be lying if it said it didn't impact my experience at all. So I try to always be fair to the movie and, really just judge it on what I think it did and not really how my experience was. But you never know. Maybe I would like this movie a little more if I didn't have that experience. Again, I try to count that out and really be generous to the movie, but either way, I don't think I was like crazy about this movie. Maybe I would have given it like a B, but as it stands right now, it's a B minus. It's decent, maybe even pretty good, but I don't think it's great. But that about does it for this episode. If you want to follow my reviews, you can find me on Letterboxd at MovieKing1224. You can also listen to this podcast on your favorite apps such as Spotify, YouTube, Apple Podcasts, and Amazon Music. If you have any comments or feedback, I would love to hear it and improve the show. And of course, if you've enjoyed this episode, please consider liking, subscribing, and hitting the notification bell to hear more like it. I appreciate you all so much for listening, and I'll talk to you next time. Thank you. Bye-bye.